and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, a new chapter: China replaces its top securities regulator in a strong bid to restore confidence across the nation's stock market. And Happy Lantern Festival as Chinese New Year festivities draws to a close. We look at just how much traditional festivals mean to Chinese this time. We begin today's program with China's Securities Regulatory Commission. Today is the first trading day after Liu Shiyu, the new chairman of China's securities watchdog, has taken office. Mr. Liu appears to be off to a great start. The Chinese mainland stocks jumped over 2% over the course of today to a 4-week high. The Shanghai Composite Index closed at 2,927 points. We'll be discussing how this leadership change will impact China's stock market in just a moment, and also how it will impact the prospect of Chinese economy, confidence about the Chinese economy as well. But first, let's take a look at this.
Back to the high points. The Shanghai Composite Index closed at 2,927 points in the first trading day after the new chairman of China's securities watchdog, Liu Shiyu, took office. Liu, the former chairman of the Agricultural Bank of China, was appointed as the new head of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, or the CSRC, last Saturday. After months of turmoil in stock markets, the replacement of former top securities regulator Xiao Gang might not be a surprise to many. Xiao became the CSRC chair in March 2013. In the past 3 years, China's stock market has experienced the restart of its IPO, the Shanghai-Hong Kong Stock Connect, a circuit breaker mechanism, and many other milestones. However, the stock market crash mid-2015 still stands as the biggest turning point by far. At one point, the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges lost as much as 40% of their value. Xiao was swiftly criticized for mishandling the crisis. Under his watch, China's new circuit breaker mechanism, designed to limit stock market sell-offs, was deployed twice in January in response to the stock market fall, but was then scrapped altogether after it caused even more panic. On paper, Liu is no doubt a qualified successor. He graduated from Tsinghua University and worked at the People's Bank of China for 18 years. He was appointed vice governor of China's central bank in 2006 and then chairman of the Agricultural Bank of China in 2014. He is experienced in managing financial risks and was a key official in China's cleanup of its urban credit cooperatives. But Liu faces huge challenges in his new role. He will have to restore investor confidence, reform the registration system for China's IPO listings, and promote the stock market's legalization process and regulation of capital in China. Though Monday has given Liu Shiyu a great start as China's top securities regulator, it is clear that many challenges lie ahead.
For more about the current realities and prospects of China's securities market and the overall confidence China and the world should have about the economy, we are joined here in the Beijing studio. Mr. Xiang Zongzuo, Chief Economist at the Agricultural Bank of China. Welcome, sir. And also here we are joined by Mr. Xu Sitao, who is the Chief Economist at Deloitte China. Welcome. Meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C., we're having Mr. Scott Kennedy, Deputy Director of the Freeman Chair in China Studies and also the Director of Project on Chinese Business and Political Economy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome, Scott, as well from the U.S. First of all, what do you three make of the market response to the replacement of the chairman of CSRC, and what would that mean, do you think, for the future of the security markets, at least in the short term? Mr. Xiang.
I think today's market response is very positive. It's a welcome to the new chairman, Mr. Liu Shiyu. To my knowledge, I think Mr. is a very senior and very capable financier and leader in financial circles. He has been for quite a long time the senior leaders PBOC, and he was chairman of Agricultural Bank of China for more than 1 year. He understands the financial risks in China markets very well. So I think it's the good news is I think Mr. Liu will focus on how to prevent the financial risks from occurring. Frankly, certainly, I think he will focus on how to make the markets legalized and well-funded on the legal basis.
I see. Will one person make a huge difference, Mr. Xu?
Well, I mean, reform is always better than no reform. I think Mr. Xiao, certain measures under his watch were controversial and investors were impatient. So I think today's reaction from stock market was indeed quite positive. I think investors, they want to see a fresh start.
Mr. Kennedy, though, what does that mean? Will the Chinese equities market go stable? I mean, in terms of policy? Or should new policies be frequently introduced so that there's reform? Do these two contradictory with one another?
I think what we've seen in today's market, the positive response is basically a gift, or it shows, a little bit of a honeymoon period for the new chairman, which he would deserve coming after Ko Chunjie. But really the test will be what happens over the coming months. And, the real goal of the CSRC chairman shouldn't be about creating value, protecting value, or keeping the market from going down. It should be enforcing fairness, expanding transparency, making this stock market run like stock markets elsewhere in the world. And he has a major task before him, and it's something that he can't complete on his own, but which, with the new year beginning, he might get off to a good start.
Interesting point. What we are talking about really is, Mr. Xiang, you know this much better than I do, the real function of China's equities market and the real function of the securities watchdog, which Mr. Liu now is heading. So what do you make of this person specifically and the watchdog body he's leading now in terms of contributing to the functions of the equities market?
First of all, I think as regulators of watchdog markets, the primary concern is not the rising or decline of index of Shanghai market, Shenzhen market. So I think their concern must be how to establish, legally or well operating or functioning markets based on law. And I think we investors has a very high expectation for new regulators, for Mr. Liu, to, for example, crack down the inside trading, to make all these offenders of security laws and as well as other wrongdoings be published. And I think ordinary investors has so much concern on the wrongdoings inside the trading, which I think the new regulator must focus on in order to establish well-funded or well-operational markets.
I see. Mr. Kennedy, of course, there's a lot of talk and debate about the securities law, and we have already heard, over the past few months, if not years, several rounds of new debates about that. Where do you think it is leading us to? Will that be a blueprint on which Mr. Liu can start his work with?
I think it could. There's still a lot of progress. We're not sure when we'll get a new law, but China's financial reforms have made more progress than other aspects of the reforms in the last 3 years, and I would expect this will be a place where we'll see more. In terms of Mr. Liu, I mean, he's got a wealth of experience in the People's Bank and in the Agricultural Bank, but I don't know if that's the right experience to have as a securities regulator. If you look at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, almost all of the regulators recently they've all been lawyers, security lawyers. They have experience regulating the securities industry for a long time, or they've been participants in the market. They've worked in securities firms, which gives them a perspective on how the traders and the market view their job. And I think so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for Liu Shiyu to understand that perspective and push the stock market regulation in a direction which it hasn't gone before.
Mr. Xu, of course, Chinese system so far is very different. And the naming of the head for Security Regulatory Commission, of course, is very different also from the US system. But how would, within the system, Mr. Liu can take advantage of the best things that he could have on hand and make sure things could happen for the positive direction?
Well, I think with the benefit of hindsight, we should have drawn a lot of lessons from last summer, meaning intervention in the stock market, so on and so forth. I think it's quite safe to conclude.
First the stock crash, and then intervention, and then circuit breaker, and
so
everything.
On and so forth,
yeah.
so on and so forth. I think with this quite expensive lesson, I think certain lessons could be really drawn.
What are they?
Well,
from
I
your
think one lesson
perspective?
is stock market on the grand scheme of things is actually very much a sideshow of the Chinese economy. There is very little so-called systemic risk. So regulators, I hope Mr. Liu won't be easily rattled by volatility of the stock market. Secondly, I think it's quite logical and politically feasible to introduce registration system, because the valuation at today's level, the political risk for implementing certain tough reform, I would argue, is relatively low.
Talking about registration system, it is quite a terminology. We might want to introduce to our audience a little bit about what exactly is the Chinese registration system and how important it is for the current new head of CSRC to look at this, to oversee. In fact, it is the introduction of a more market-based registration system for initial public offering. That would be one of the most important tasks for Mr. Liu Shiyu and his colleagues at the securities watchdog. It is expected to be unveiled later this year. Under the current IPO system, firms set to list must undergo a complex application process that could involve multiple rounds of review before approval is received from CSRS. But the new market-based system allows investors and companies to decide valuation prices and timings of new share offerings in response to current market circumstances. Interesting. Help us to understand in layman's words, what exactly does that mean? Why registration system is still being considered, at least at this moment, something to work on, something relatively important?
I don't think the ordinary investors understand the so-called registration system compared to the old approval the system. So I think CSRC and Mr. Liu have a very tough job to communicate with investors how to explain the details of a registration system and how to implement this system.
Well, I want to ask you first. First of all, Mr. Xiang, you are the chief economist of the ABC Agricultural Bank of China. You've been a very seasoned Chinese economist. How would you explain in one sentence, especially to our overseas audience, how does that work? Give an analogy or two.
Simply speaking, the so-called registration system, that means the IPO the company should be determined by markets, by security firms, by accounting firms, by legal firms, by markets, so to speak.
Right.
But how the process working? So who will, supervise the
whole process?
Agents, accounting firms, and legal firms, or investment bankers, to make sure the company is qualified for IPO.
Mr. Kennedy,
this process is quite complicated, and all the investors don't understand the process. So I mean, before implementation of this system, the regulators, Mr. Liu and his team, will do very much work to communicate with the market, with the investors, in order for investors to understand the system. Otherwise, I think market will have a very high level of uncertainty.
This is extremely
The uncertainty will, have a very harmful effect on the market prices and the confidence of investors, which will be disastrous.
Very, very interesting point you just raised, which is the issue of communication. So there are two things. One is when a policy is being implemented, how much debate it has to go through in order to see all aspects of opinions, so that every possibility can be calculated into the eventual decision making. Secondly, that is, how much communication has to be done before a policy, particularly concerning a very sensitive issue such as the securities market in China, from the Chinese policymakers within this current system. How can that communication be done? Mr. Xu, I give you a huge topic. Of course, you can talk for 2 or 3 hours.
Well,
but what about just
40
40 seconds?
First of all, I don't think individual investors need to understand everything. I think they can rely on institutional investors' judgment to perform certain duties. I mean, fundamentally, all this reform is about improving corporate governance, is about increasing participation of foreign ownership and institutional investors. I think individual investors, I don't think they need to understand everything.
However, the institutional investors and foreign corporations, they need to understand what all of this is about.
Of course.
Do we have a mechanism now to do that?
I think one mechanism is in November 2014, China introduced Shanghai-Hong Kong Equity Link. Since November 2014, I would say the experiment has been quite successful.
Okay.
So the next step is to connect Shenzhen Stock Exchange with Hong Kong, and ultimately to integrate Hong Kong, Shanghai, Shenzhen into one market.
Interesting. Step by step, what kind of rhythm, though, Mr. Xiao?
Well, I think the regulators should take measures to change the sentiment of ordinary individual investors. Why? The Chinese market has a very peculiar characteristics. Investors, when they make money, they feel very happy. And when they lose money, they always blame on regulators or government. Why? Because they believe, well, all these companies, IPO or new financing approved by government. So government should be responsible for all these companies. Now, you announce you will change the system from the approval system to a registration, a market-based system. I don't know. I still believe the government should be responsible. Well, so that's why the investors believe Chinese market is the so-called government maneuvered market. Okay, why? So I think regulators should have a responsibility to change this sentiment.
Okay, wow, Mr. Kennedy, the regulators has a lot to do. The securities watchdog, well, they don't have so many people to do all of this communication. But Mr. Kennedy, you've been attentively listening to your Chinese colleagues while they are debating this very important topic about China's securities market and also the overall prospect of the Chinese economy as a result of this. Mr. Kennedy, your thoughts here.
Well, I actually have a lot of faith in China's investors, even the individuals who go during their lunch hour to trade. I think.
Well, Mr. Kennedy, I have to say you are saying something very politically correct. You know, just sounds beautiful, but give us the real points.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So I think the challenge. I don't think that people say that China's stock market investors aren't mature. I think they're actually quite mature. It's the regulators that are immature, and they keep sending the signal that they're going to intervene and protect investors, and they need to stop doing that. I think the next best opportunity for that will be in 2 weeks when shares are supposed to be unlocked that have been tied up for several months. They were supposed to be unlocked in early January, and the prospect of that sent the market down, and so they suspended that unlocking. Do the stock market regulators now have the courage to let the market operate as it's supposed to, let investors respond to that news? That will be Liu Shiyu's first big test. And that'll be coming right at the opening of China's National People's Congress annual session. So it's a lot of pressure at that point, and so we'll be able to judge the regulators then, we already know that the investors will do right if they're given the right information and the right signals.
We want to talk decently, and therefore, Mr. Kennedy, we're not just going to talk about the problems and the challenge, but also what can be the solutions. Of course, it's very hard, Mr. Kennedy, I understand, to compare the US system with the Chinese system, and the timing is very different between the two systems. But you've been doing research about China's securities market for long. Is there any inspiration in history from your country that we could have to shed a little bit light, at least, about what we can do and what can be cautious about?
Sure. Well, the U.S. stock markets are not perfect. There's insider trading. There's lots of problems. We had the global financial crisis in part because of the way American security markets operated and the type of governance. The mid-70s was the first period when there was a great deal of new regulation that addressed the market, and certainly post-global financial crisis, a new series of regulations and laws passed in the United States. It's interesting that our current SEC chairman, Xi, is formerly a prosecutor, and it's a very clear message what her task ought to be. So we've struggled ourselves with markets, but we have a relatively healthy market. There's a great deal of transparency at the IPO process, during trading, and really that's the purpose that Li Shiyu faces. And all we can do is wish him well, and we're not going to judge his performance by how much the market goes up or down, but how he does his job as a regulator of protecting the market's fairness, transparency, ensuring that the market acts as a source of corporate governance for those listed.
CSRC, of course, is only one of those organizations and government bodies responsible for establishing the system, perfecting the system, getting rid of the problems, but it needs a lot of coordination among various places. What do you make of what Mr. Kennedy just said, Mr. Xu, and also the new CSRC head could do as an individual and his securities watchdog as one organization?
Yeah, I think comparisons between China and U.S. Can be made, just to allude some of the things Mr. Kennedy has said. I think U.S. market used to be, to a certain extent, corrupt. But I think China's strength over U.S., we don't have a shortage of savings. We have a lot of savings, we have a lot of capital. We simply do not have a good distribution system, which is an analogy of capital market. That's something we have to. On regulatory framework, I do think coordination between central bank and the securities watchdog is critically important. Today's financial market is so complicated, we cannot afford to make the mistakes on so-called regulatory segmentation, meaning regulators are only watching what they are supposed to watch. So that's a very, very important lesson to be drawn from last summer.
That's a challenge facing all kinds of regulators, not only in this country, but elsewhere as well. Mr. Xiang.
Well, I think the key objective of Chinese financial reform is to increase the percentage or ratio, so-called direct financing, which means security markets should play more and more important role in the future. So I think the new chairman, Mr. Yu, I think should have do many jobs in this regard. For example, to improve the structure, the architecture of bond markets, to let many companies, even local governments, to issue bonds, to increase the portfolio. Certainly, I think he will improve or promote the new so-called new board, and there is a so-called new third board, and a new a strategic board, and to let many new companies to have an opportunity to issue securities or even IPO. So, the key issue is to enhance the confidence of investors to transfer the deposits that Mr. Xi mentioned into the direct financing into the markets. I think this will very good for a so-called new real economy and the new sectors of China's economy.
A lot of things needs to be done.
Yeah.
And a lot of work, certainly, waiting for Mr. Liu and his colleagues at CSRC and also in many other Chinese organizations. Thank you so much, Xiang Zongzuo, Xu Sitao with us here in Beijing, Scott Kennedy in Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. All the best. Thank you so much. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Happy Lantern Festival. As Chinese New Year festivities draws to a close, we look at just how much traditional festival mean for Chinese these days. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Tian Wei. After 2 weeks of Chinese New Year celebrations, we come to Lantern Festival, which is held on the 15th day of the first lunar month, according to Chinese calendar. People across China celebrate this day by decorating lanterns, preparing delicacies, and organizing line dances. However, concerns of keeping the spirit of Chinese festivals have arisen in recent years as a growing number of younger Chinese people today put less emphasis on Chinese festivals and instead celebrate Western holidays. At least some believe so. Let's take a look at this.
Lighting up the night. Thousands of lanterns line the streets, hung from homes and storefronts, setting the stage for the processions and colourful performances. In Shanghai, to celebrate the Year of the Monkey, there's a 20-meter-tall Monkey King lantern.
It's so big and so beautiful. I've never seen anything like this before.
What's more, people are gearing up with parades, stilt walking and dragon dances.
My grandfather was a stilt walker. I used to see him performing and was amazed by him. So I started to learn stilt walking. I'm a little nervous, but still very excited to perform today.
Families also come together to eat sweet rice balls for good fortune and family unity. Just last week, as China was still in the midst of celebrating the Spring Festival, Valentine's Day also received a lot of attention. Many Chinese have adopted Western traditions, such as exchanging gifts and going on a special date. Some even celebrated the special Western Day in a Chinese way.
Today is Valentine's Day, so we came here especially to set up a sky lantern. We hope that all of our work can be successful this year and that our family can be healthy.
Many other foreign festivals have also taken Chinese society by storm. According to a survey carried out by People.com, Mother's Day, Father's Day and Christmas are the most celebrated Western festivals in China. Today marks the end of the Spring Festival. As more people become concerned of losing the true spirit of China's traditional festivals, it could be time to think about how we can preserve Chinese traditions for generations to come.
For more on the Chinese Lantern Festival and all the festivities related to the Chinese traditional festivals, we're joined here in the Beijing studio, Gregory Zhang, our current affairs commentator, originally coming from the mainland, went to Taiwan, also lived in the United States, now coming back again. So I guess you know everywhere. You can brief us about all the festivities over there. Meanwhile, joining us, David Moser, Academic Director of Chinese Studies at the Beijing Capital Normal University. David has been living in China for about 20 years, right, David?
That's right.
Right. It's really amazing how to see the country has changed. Having said that, though, do we have a problem preserving the traditions and the cultures related to Chinese traditional festivals? Where are the so-called Western festivals driving people away from the traditional ones? Gregory, are you concerned?
Not at all, because Chinese festivals have a reason for them to stay, whether it's the one we are talking about today or it's mid-May or mid-autumn festivals. So these festivals have their roots, and the ways of celebration is very unique. Therefore, no matter how time has passed, I always to be people enough to enjoy part of it and celebrate the way they like. With the Western festival coming to play, give them more choices. It's not necessarily a competition or one replace the other.
Right.
Coexistence.
Coexistence. David?
Well, I think the problem now is that so many holidays have become commercialized. I mean, let's face it, Valentine's Day was never actually a very important holiday, but once money got involved, same thing with Christmas. I think probably there are few too many holidays now. My daughter goes to an international school, and it seems like she hardly ever goes to school. They do the Western holidays and the Chinese holidays, and oh, you're home again, you know.
I want to go to those schools.
Yes, me too, yeah.
Yeah, but having said that, though, it is a true phenomenon that commercialization has made some of the Western holidays, which the Chinese are not that familiar with, and therefore they could talk to Chinese into celebrating all of this by consuming. But the question is, will those close to heart? That is the issue. One, we see such interesting phenomenon of making fun of these festivals. You know, whether it's Valentine's Day or some of the Christmas, people are having fun. However, when it comes to traditional festivals, it seems that people are feeling the deep meanings of it. It's about family reunion. It's about going home. It's about starting a new year. It's about wrapping up what we had before. So is there a difference in terms of the meanings of the festival between the so-called East and the West?
I think festivals have many implications. One part of that is good eating, good time, good party, and so on. The other part, of course, is, as you mentioned before, is talk about togetherness, talking about looking to the future, talk about friendship, talk about family relations. So it depends on the person taking part in the festivals, at what level he or she would enjoy. So that's fine, it's just as fine. The same is true, I think, with Western festivals, you know, whether it's Veterans Day or it's Thanksgiving or whatever. It has a meaning. So if you are a person interested in the subject matter, you can study it as an issue. You can become a historian and write a book about it. But if not, you can enjoy it on the superficial level. So it's in a way, it has been set up in such a way that everybody can take part in it and enjoy it to some extent.
Can have a great time, but it seems that people are having a great time in a different way, at least according to a survey coming from People's Daily, people.com. More than 70%, as the survey indicated, Chinese people, 71.9% agree that the true spirit of these festivals, meaning the Chinese festivals, are fading. The ratio is even higher among people of younger generation, above 80%. But the question is, do we know ourselves about the real essence of these festivals? When we quote-unquote criticize the younger generation that they don't love so-called traditional festivals anymore. So what are the real essence, David, from your perspective, Chinese festivals?
Yeah, from my perspective, of course there's a lot in common with Western festivals. There's a lot about family. But don't forget, Chinese culture was largely an agrarian culture. It's about the lunar calendar, it's about farming, it's about harvests, and so eating is involved. It's about food, you know, you can't get, so it's about food. As China becomes more urbanized, people no longer are close to the earth, they're close to these seasons, right? So the holidays and some of the customs can seem a little bit irrelevant or far away from their daily life. And also, what used to be so special about the holidays was eating this amazing food. Now you can, every day of the week, or you can go stuff yourself with the greatest food in the world. So that the food has lost its significance, and I see why the younger people think that, you know, what do these holidays mean?
There are different transformations, though, about what kind of food to consume. You see more people who are interested in tea cultures now, who are interested in vegetarian food, who are interested in best essence of all foods, rather than just lavishly having as much as possible as we used to be, because that was pretty much a very least the materialistic life we had before, and we didn't have much to celebrate. So what do you think about that transformation? For example, you see the tea culture getting ever more popular. You see vegetarian food. You see people celebrated with trying to understand what is behind the foods. You see that documentaries put even on CCTV, that the one about food is the most welcome, the highest rating. Nobody could have competed with that. So, Gregory, what do you make of that?
Well, of course, as time goes by and the social environment changes.
We don't want to sound like philosophers. Let's just be
Therefore-
Chinese and also talk about our culture.
There are many choices emerging. In the past, it was not there. For example, talking about tea, talking about drinking coffee, talking about having fun to see a performance. So nowadays, people have much more choices than ever before. Therefore, I think it is desirable to have those things existing.
It's a different level of appreciating the culture.
You can say that.
It's
too.
a different level of appreciating so-called the food. Poems goes with it.
Yep.
Literature works as well. Even movies that you see are celebrated because it's related to the food. So it seems that people are earning for a very different level of celebration, not just material wealth, but something here and something here. David?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are yearning for something that goes beyond the material, something that is intellectual or spiritual. But also, these holidays are moving into cyberspace. I mean, how many of a hongbao that were given last New Year's festival were on Weixin or in virtual space and not actually physical money. Yeah.
So are you suggesting we're going two very different directions? One is more spiritual, more real discovery about the so-called real culture, and the other direction is more about ever more materialistic, giving hongbao as one of the most interesting way of celebrating the New Year on the New Year's Eve now.
I think there's a lot of commercial pressure to go in that direction. A lot of people get sucked into it. I think probably it will take a younger generation of people who get tired of that and rebel against it. Turn off the cell phone, turn off the TV, get back to the family.
Because I think the younger generation are very interested in what's going on the mobile phone, not necessarily turning it off. You're doing wishful thinking.
It's an idealistic hope
wishful
that I have.
thinking from a different generation.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Gregory, what do you make of what we just said? Different directions.
I think it's desirable because a person has more choices. If you know how to make a choice, that's a good thing.
But the question is whether the two choices are both be given to the public with the same volume, with the same space, and with the same possibilities.
You cannot guarantee that. For example, anything that happens on Earth, including festival celebration, people will look at it from different levels. For example, when I enjoy myself with a vacation or festival, I have my way of doing things. For instance, I called up my old friends this afternoon to tell them that we're in good shape. Stay safe and sound. That's the message for the festival. I also ate the substitute of tangyuan. I ate baozi with sweet
dumplings
in it. So it's up to you. You have many choices.
You do have many choices, but what about the festival as a whole? Yes, individual, you can have as much choice as you want. You can celebrate or not to celebrate this festival or that festival. But the thing is, as a country, as a culture, where are we going? That's what we are discussing here. And also whether we, with more experiences globally, be able to identify some of the new characteristics of our culture which were not picked up before because there was not a globalized world. David, before we were coming into the studio, we were joking about this, that the Chinese food had during the festivities usually are those with fillings, not necessarily like the West. For example, we have dumplings with fillings, sweet dumplings with fillings, and also the mooncake with fillings.
Right.
And however, when you have Thanksgiving, Christmas, you have, very different food. So how should we maybe try to understand the national characteristics just through the kinds of food that we're having, or many other subjects? How much attention have we been given to these interesting questions? Or we had just blindly, lavishly celebrated as our ancestor did at the time when there were not much material wealth?
Well, actually people do pay quite a lot of attention to that. It's on the websites, and people look at the origins of these foods, look at the customs. If you just look a casual look at all the websites now about Yuan Xiaojie, you see all these different accounts of the historical reasons in history, how they came. But what will come down to it is all of these things do reflect a certain a long-standing Chinese cultural tradition and a sort of Chinese psychology of the Chinese people. It's all in there. If you're a historian and you're interested, it's all in there if you want to look for it.
The interesting thing is what we are talking about is mainly about information. It gives people information, and yet with information, what shall we do? Would we be able to go one step closer to something more interesting? Having another thought about why we are what we are today and where we're heading for according to what we were before. So these are interesting questions and intellectual questions. Are those questions being asked? Are researches being done about those? Are those research and interesting information being shared by the public? Is the media responsible for sharing those information, or the media just put on a extravagant gala and just to celebrate it? So these are very interesting questions, Gregory.
I agree. I think not only that, I like to see the spirit of harmony, of caring, of friendship, not only exists during those festival days, but become a climate, become a spirit of society. That's one thing. Second, I like to see those young men not only enjoy themselves by eating, partying with friends here, good time, but also have more in-depth vision, hopefully ambition, to serve the nation, society better. Wow. So you have a combination of the two. Enjoy myself on the one hand and do something serious on the other. I think this balance is needed, very much needed.
Well, I guess different people have different expectations about what needs to be done about the festivals. But for so far, we want to wish the two of you and your family Happy Lantern Festival.
Thank you.
A lot of yuanxiao and certainly a lot of prosperity in this new year. Thank you so much, Gregory Yin and David Moser.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, gentlemen. And of course, to wish all of you as well Happy Lantern Festival. With that, we're coming to the end of today's program. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.